Imagine a time not so long ago when everyday life was a minefield of invisible dangers. Consider something as simple, as wholesome, as a glass of milk. Today, it's a symbol of health and childhood. But what if I told you that this very act was once a life-threatening gamble, a game of Russian roulette with an unseen enemy? And what if a simple scratch, a playful bite from an animal, wasn't just an injury, but a guaranteed, horrifying death sentence? This was not a fantasy. This was the reality of the world. A world held hostage by invisible killers it couldn't see, couldn't name, and couldn't fight. For centuries, humanity was blinded by a deeply flawed idea, a convenient lie, the theory of spontaneous generation. It claimed that life, in its most basic forms, could simply erupt from nothing. That disease was a curse, a random event born from within the decaying substance itself. But one man refused to accept this. It's one man whose eyes could perceive a world hidden from the rest of us. A man so relentlessly obsessed with this unseen realm that his peers and even his friends thought he was strange, eccentric, even paranoid. This is the story of how that one man's obsession has changed everything. This is the story of Louis Pasteur, the man who declared war on microorganisms and became their ultimate scourge, the hero who taught humanity how to fight back. To understand his genius, we must first understand the world he was born into. The 19th century was a world of progress, but also a world of filth. Sickness was a constant, unwelcome guest in every home. The greatest minds in medicine were convinced that germs were the result of disease, not the cause. They saw cloudy broth, rotting meat, and believed that the decay itself was giving birth to the maggots and microbes. It was an idea that made sense on the surface, but it was profoundly, dangerously wrong. Into this world walked Louis Pasteur, armed with a microscope and an almost supernatural power of observation. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a detective, and the entire world was his crime scene. His personal habits became the stuff of legend. Friends would note how he always avoided shaking hands, recoiling from the simple human touch as if it were poison. Before dining, even among friends, he would take his napkin and painstakingly wipe his plate, his glass, his silverware. He was scrubbing away invisible contaminants that only he seemed to believe were there. Most famously, he would dissect his bread at the dinner table. While others ate without a thought, Pasteur would crumble his portion, his sharp eyes scanning for tiny foreign particles. Specks of dirt, fragments of insects, things no one else could possibly see or would even care to look for. Was this the behavior of a madman, a paranoid eccentric, or was it the focused discipline of a man who saw the terrifying, hidden truth? Pasteur knew the very air we breathe, the water we drink, the surfaces we touch were teeming, swarming with an infinite army of invisible life forms. He gave them a name, germs, and he would dedicate his life to exposing them and proving they came not from within, but from the outside. His first major campaign in this war was fought in the vats and cellars of France. The country's pride, its wine, beer, and milk industries was under constant threat. Batches would inexplicably turn sour, costing fortunes and ruining livelihoods. The accepted wisdom was that the liquid was simply spoiling itself, an internal failure. Pasteur pointed his microscope and showed them the truth. He revealed the invaders. Specific living microorganisms from the outside world were contaminating their products. His solution, born from this observation, was a stroke of pure genius in its simplicity. He proposed a gentle heating, not boiling, which would ruin the taste, but a precise, controlled application of heat, just enough to kill the harmful invading germs while preserving the quality of the beverage. The process was a stunning success. It was named in his honor, Pasteurization. Today, when you see his name gracing a carton of milk in your refrigerator, you are seeing the legacy of that first great victory. The fact that this 150-year-old discovery is still protecting you today is incredible. If you agree, take a second to hit that like button, it really supports the channel. Pasteur had made food safe, but his greatest, most terrifying challenge was still ahead. The enemies he had fought in wine vats were now being fought inside living bodies. He turned his attention to the diseases devastating both animals and humanity. Anthrax, a brutal infection, was wiping out entire herds of livestock. And then there was rabies. There is perhaps no disease in human history that has inspired such primal terror. A bite from a rabid animal wasn't just an injury. It was a seal of death, horrifying countdown to madness, agony, and a 100% certain demise. There was no treatment, there was no cure, there was absolutely no hope. Pasteur, building on his germ theory, developed a radical new concept: the vaccine. He theorized that if you could introduce a weakened, attenuated version of the germ into a healthy body, you could train that body's natural defenses to recognize and destroy the real enemy when it attacked. He proved it by creating a vaccine for anthrax in sheep, a triumph of veterinary medicine. But to test such a thing on a human, that was a moral and ethical line no one dared to cross. Until the world gave him no choice. On a summer day in 1885, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister was dragged into his laboratory. He had been viciously mauled by a rabid dog, suffering 14 deep bites. The boy was already a ghost. Everyone, including his weeping parents, knew he was doomed to die. In their desperation, they begged Pasteur to try his experimental, untested rabies treatment. Pasteur was a chemist, not a medical doctor. He was paralyzed with fear. A failure would not just be a failed experiment. It would brand him as a reckless killer. But looking at the terrified child, he knew that inaction was also a death sentence. He took the ultimate scientific and moral gamble. Over the next 10 days, in an agonizing and tense vigil, he administered a series of 13 injections, each one containing a slightly stronger version of the weakened rabies virus. The scientific community, and indeed the world, held its breath. Days turned into weeks. The boy did not develop the dreaded symptoms of hydrophobia. The madness never came. Joseph Meister lived. In that moment, Louis Pasteur had not just saved one child from a horrific fate. He had stared down one of humanity's most ancient terrors and had won. He had officially launched the age of modern immunology and vaccines. From that day forward, the world was irrevocably changed. Pasteur's germ theory became the bedrock of modern medicine. Finally, doctors understood that they needed to wash their hands. Surgeons began sterilizing their instruments. The simple act of creating antiseptic conditions in hospitals saved more lives than can ever be counted. Countless human and animal lives have been, and continue to be, saved by the principle of vaccination he pioneered. It's a debt that our modern world owes to this one single man. A man whose obsession with what he could see under a microscope allowed the rest of us to live longer, healthier lives. He proved that science is not a passive act of observation. It is an active, powerful tool to master nature, to ease suffering, and to aid mankind. This channel, Legacy Docs, is dedicated to uncovering these pivotal stories. The stories of the geniuses, the heroes, the rebels who shaped our reality. If you believe these legacies deserve to be remembered, please hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey through history. Louis Pasteur, the man who was once seen as a paranoid, germ-obsessed eccentric, is now remembered as one of the greatest heroes in the history of humanity.